Alrighty guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be going over the new latest and greatest of the 270 caliber. We're talking about the 6.8 Western today.
So the 6.8 Western is Winchester and Browning combining forces and improving upon the 270 wisdom. They saw a need in the market where guys were wanting those high BC bullets, specifically like your 165 ABLR, 175 Sierra tipped Game King, 170 ballistics, 162 coppers, and then there are a couple soft point options out there. But they decided to load those up for guys pushing the limits, wanting to stretch their legs up, but also maintain energy out at range.
So here we have some of the bullet options that you can find in the 270 cal. Obviously we are missing quite a few, but the ones that we have been gravitating to especially is that 170 grain EOL. We haven't quite tried these 150 grain Sierra Game Kings, but we are going to start trying those as well here pretty quick. And then we've obviously got our favorite type of bullet is those ballistics. So we've got some in the 130 grain. They do make some heavier, so maybe one day if we get a hold of those, we'll do those as well. And then we have the SSTs and the VMAXs as our bullets that we use from Hornady.
So here we have some powders that we've been messing around with and testing with. M570 is by far my favorite, but some other good options that may work well in your rifles are 7828 Super Shortcut, IMR 4831, which does very well as well, and we got a few others.
Yep, so we haven't tried these yet. These aren't some of our favorite powders, but they will work. We have the H4831 Shortcut. It's going to be very similar to that IMR 4831. And then we have Stayball 6.5, which is that Winchester powder. And then we have Superformance and Mag Pro. We haven't tried these, but people think they do really well, so it's up to you to test that.
Right here you'll see a regular chart. If you want to look at it more closely, you can pause it. But besides that, we'll go and look at the graphs.
So just taking a look here at this MOA drop chart that we have, it is going to be calculated for 5,000 feet in elevation because that's where we got this low data. And over these charts, we're going to talk about three specific ranges. 500 yards being the furthest most people would consider for shooting at game. 1,000 yards for a typical target, like still targets and things. And then 2,000 yards if we really wanted to push the envelope and stretch out that 6.8 Western. So taking a look at 500 yards, the 165 grain Accubon long range and the 170 grain EOL are going to be flying roughly the same. They're both going to be about 7.2 to 7.3 minutes of drop. So for all intents and purposes, they are the same. But at that 500 yard mark, the 110 VMAX is going to be the flattest at 5 3/4 minutes.
Yep. Moving out to that 1,000 yard mark, is flattest right now is going to be that 110 VMAX, which fast, flat, nasty speed. If you're wanting to shoot coyotes, great bullet choice for that one. For all intents and purposes, the 165 ABLR and 170 EOL are the exact same in about 21.5 minutes, and then that 130 ballistic trailing in fourth for that for 22.5 minutes, a full minute different from those two high BC bullets.
Yep, and that's going to be a trend here, is that 130 grain ballistic is going to be right in the middle or just trailing for this whole thing. So as we look here at 2,000 yards, this is where that 165 and that 170 really take off and that BC starts to show. Out at that range, they're within a minute of each other, but the EOL, because it has a slightly better BC, it is going to be about 3/4 of a minute better at 71.2 minutes of drop. But at this range, that 110 VMAX really takes a nosedive. It's not flat anymore. It's lost most of its velocity, and it's going to be at 99.6 minutes of drop. So there is a drastic difference between those high BC bullets and those lower BC bullets.
All right, we're looking at velocities now. So we're going to look at that 500 yard mark. For those 110s, we're looking at a velocity of 2442. 130 ballistics, 2345, 165 ABLRs, 2427, and rounding out the field with that 170 EOL, we're looking at 2420.
And that's going to be a trend that we're going to tend to see here in this is those two heavier bullets are going to be very similar in their velocities. Now, for speaking on velocity, for big game and things, we want that bullet to be able to expand. Now, on elk and deer, you're going to want about that 1800 foot a second mark, just so that you can ensure that that bullet is going to expand how it is intended to expand. So, just taking a look here, that 110 grain VMAX, obviously, it's not a big game bullet, but to each their own. If they wanted to use it, it would be effective out to about 750 yards on to hit that mark of 1800 feet a second. The ballistic is going to be about 900, and then the ABLR and that EOL are both roughly around that 1,000 yard to 1,100 yard mark. The EOL obviously is going to have a little bit more range on it, but not a ton. So here we're going to talk about energy. Energy is important to a point. Now, you could have all the energy in the world, but if you don't have that velocity to match, the bullet won't expand, so it doesn't matter how much energy you carry. However, taking a look at energy, thinking about that 1,000 foot-pounds mark for deer and that 1,500 foot-pounds mark for elk, we'll kind of take a look at this here. So that 110 grain VMAX is only going to be good for elk out to about 400 yards, and for deer, about 750. So its range is definitely going to be limited by the energy if you care about energy. Now, looking at the ballistic and the other two bullets, they're going to stretch out just a touch further. For elk, that ballistic is going to be right around 570, 550 yards, versus the EOL and the ABLR are both going to be good out to right around that 900 yard mark. So those heavier bullets, they're going to carry more mass, so they'll be able to transfer that energy and have more energy out there at those further ranges.
And not to mention, but also with the velocity we just barely went over, they're going to have enough velocity to expand and work as designed by the manufacturers of those bullets.
So should you be consistent enough and able to hit those targets at those ranges, hey, those two heavier bullets would work for a long range hunting bullet if you can hit the target.
Yep, that big if. You have to know yourself and make that judgment, call yourself. Now, we didn't talk about deer with those long heavies for that 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. We're getting out there to about 1,200 yards, just past 1,200 yards if you're going with deer. But still, you have to be able to hit the target. If not, it's not worth it. And plus, you don't want to hike that far.
It's not worth hiking that far, and you don't want your buddy to make fun of you if you miss.
Alrighty, we're going to go over some quick pros and cons on the 6.8 Western. First pro is that it's flat. You got a high BC bullet, but to complement that with the high BC bullets is they're moving quick. It's a Magnum, and it sure can hit with authority and hit your target, whether it be target shooting or on game.
Another thing is that it's super efficient. For the velocities and bullet weights that they are shooting, it's actually not using that much powder in comparison with other rounds. And with that, the factory ammo that you can find and that you can get a hold of does make velocity. Unlike some of the other new cartridges of today, this one will actually match, sometimes even beating, depending on the rifle, the box posted velocities. Now let's take a look over here at the cons.
First con is brass availability. The only brass option you have that is strict 6.8 Western is Winchester brass. Winchester Browning, however you want. It's the same company making it. Now, going from there are different options like 300 Wisdom that you can use to resize down to 6.8 Western. Lapua just introduced 300 Wisdom to their line. That's a great option to use. There are also people using 270 Wisdom and 7 SAUM. I personally use 7 SAUM brass and will resize that and fire form it to 6.8 Western, and it does pretty good.
Yeah, where your brass isn't available, if you can't get a hold of brass, there's always that factory ammo option. You could get the factory ammo and shoot that factory ammo and reload that brass. The only problem with factory ammo is that they are also running into these component issues. And because of that, the options and the availability of 6.8 Western factory ammunition is very lacking.
Yep.
It's also not very high in as many options as some of the other 270 caliber or these new modern long range, if you will, hunting cartridges.
Yeah, and if you watch the 6.8 Western and follow the factory ammunition, it runs in cycles. You'll see ABLRs on the shelf, and then you'll see the tip Game Kings on the shelf, and it won't be at the same time that they're on the shelf, but it just goes in cycles.
Yep. So keep an eye out for what you want and what you want to find there. Another con for it is the availability of factory rifles and rifle options. Now, you can find rifles in the $500 range, clear up to like that $4,000, $5,000 range in rifles. The only issue, though, is can you find the rifle? Can you find the rifle you want? And is that rifle going to be something that you want to invest in for the 6.8 Western?
Yep, and I mean, you have mainly Browning and Winchester rifles, but there are also a couple others like Christensen and Fierce that have adopted the 6.8 Western.